Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. I have to confess that I did not know very much about this congregation, and I'm very moved, I guess, to hear that you're here. I'm one of those people who lives downtown and works downtown. I'm totally focused on over years, and not even in a very planned way, focused on the lesbian and gay community in Toronto. And we often downtown have the perception about the outsides, the borders of the city being far less supportive, and I'm so glad to find out it's not true. I'd like to maybe perhaps start by telling you a little bit about myself. I kind of find myself surprised in a way to be, at this point, considered a leader in the lesbian and gay community. Certainly, that's come about very slowly, and it's kind of a bit of an unlikely thing for someone like me to be. My parents were immigrants from Colombia who came to Canada in 1959 and were a bit unusual in themselves. My father was an orphan and had only one sister, and my mother lost her father at a very young age and ended up having to move away from a lot of her family. So they were kind of isolated in a little bit in a country where large families are the norm. They came to Ottawa because my father's sister worked at the Colombian embassy. And she married a Canadian, so they were able to sponsor my father to come. And I'm the oldest of 6 children, someone who always did very well in school. And so my parents, being relatively open-minded and not wishing to direct me very strongly, gave me a lot of leeway to do whatever I wanted. As long as I did well, they were happy. So eventually, I ended up moving to Toronto to go to university, and particularly I went to York University and studied art. So one of the comments I wanted to make about today is seeing those beautiful photographs. I think it's quite beautiful to see that the power of art to express people's feelings and change people's minds is something that I believe in very strongly. And it's so nice to be in a place where people can sort of use art as a tool to really understand one another. What is Pride? Pride, everyone knows, is one of the big annual celebrations in the city of Toronto. It is famous for generating tons of economic activity. I think over $66 million is the figure that from the last survey that we did. We basically closed downtown for 3 days of concerts and parades and marches, and it's taken us a long time to get here. The last Pride in June was the 31st annual Pride in Toronto. And but it wasn't an easy year for our organization. So that's one of the things I wanted to tell you about today, because I'm sure you, some of you may have been reading in the news this year, particularly about the funding problems that we've been having, particularly, excuse me, at the level of the city of Toronto. But you know, the lesbian and gay community emerged pretty much in the wake of one particular event, which is now celebrated every year on June 28th. And it was a riot that took place in New York City at a bar called the Stonewall Inn. And so now we talk about Stonewall being sort of the pivotal moment in the emergence of a civil rights movement, essentially, about lesbian and gay rights and education and awareness. And it's worth telling you that story because it's something that even I didn't really know the details of very much, although it's a term that you hear quite often. So what happened was that at that time in New York City, all of the lesbian and gay bars were actually run by the mafia. And so you would come in you would know where they were if you were in the community, and you would go to an unmarked door and you'd knock on the door, and then someone would open a little slot and admit you or not, depending on whether you appeared to be lesbian or gay. The social norms at that time were very different from today. I mean, it was very much kind of this duality between, masculine and feminine. So among the gay men, there were, the macho guys, and there were the queens, as they were called, the transvestites, the transsexuals. And likewise, amongst the women, there was very much this butch femme, culture, which continues to some degree to this day, but has been very much relaxed. As often happened, the police raided the bar that particular night, and they rounded up everybody who was inside and started loading them into the paddy wagons that were parked outside. And it was a custom that, or it was well known, for example, that the mafia would actually pay off the police to, it was just kind of this system of bribery and corruption that existed at the time. So as people were being loaded into the paddy wagon, a number of people started congregating outside the bar, and they started throwing pennies at the police. And that referred to this custom of, paying off the police. So people were throwing money at them. And eventually, there was enough of a distraction that one of the people who had been arrested, one of the drag queens, and I'd like to say that in this particular case, most of the people who were involved were Latino and black. One of the drag queens escaped out of the car and started beating a police officer with her purse. And this basically was the act that erupted into vandalism, police cars being burned, and the beginning of a protest movement which has continued to this very day. Lesbian and gay leaders very much learned the lessons that were taught to them by the civil rights movement, particularly the black civil rights movement, and also the women's movement in the 60s. So we fast forward now to 31 years later, and we see that the community has grown. It has diversified itself. It's quite interesting to see, for example, nowadays that people at a very young age can identify as lesbian and gay, and certainly that wasn't true when I was young. First of all, there was no sexuality for children, and the only models that you ever saw were the male-female couple, essentially, that was on mainstream television. And now we have a community that is, well, I guess the best way to describe its diversity is just by using the letters of the acronym that are now used by Pride Toronto to describe who its community is. And that's LGBTQQ2SA. Hard to even remember and pronounce. So I'll just explain what all those letters mean to you. L, of course, is lesbian, G for gay, bisexual, for B, and T is transsexual and transgender. That's why there's two T's. Then I refers to intersex, which is an emerging new identity where people, either because of their actual physical body, where there are some people who are born either with unusual sexual characteristics, do not identify as either male or female, or choose to not identify as male or female. That's the I. Then we have the two Qs. Queer, which is a word that I wasn't sure that you would even be prepared to hear, because for some people it's still a very offensive word. But it's a word that's being reappropriated. Just like gay used to be considered to be an insult, or lesbian, the word queer now is sort of emerging as probably one of the better words that captures the whole spectrum of the community. We have a second Q now, and it's questioning. It's people who aren't sure. People who may be either because they're young or because the circumstances of their lives have never allowed them to really fully express who they are. We welcome them in the community. 2S refers to the two-spirited community, which is, of course, are the Aboriginals, who actually historically have a far more open acceptance of lesbian and gay people in their community, and often referred to them as having two spirits, which gave them a special status, and in fact more wisdom than the average person. And finally, the most recent addition is the letter A, which stands for allies. And it's you. It's the people who support us. It's the people who are our families and friends, and who, for whom Pride is also a very important and special time of year. So let me tell you now a little bit more about what's been happening over the past year. This last year that we've been through is certainly going to go down in the history of Pride as one of the most pivotal moments in our history, and one in which we came very close to a cataclysmic moment of either collapse or fracture. And yet, those of you who may have attended Pride last June will certainly have felt that it was probably one of the best Pride celebrations we've ever had. The year began in September of 2010 when it was discovered that we had incurred a very large deficit after the 2010 festival, which was our 30th anniversary. So of course, like any organization, when you come to a big anniversary, you plan to make it bigger than it's ever been in the past. And certainly for our 30th anniversary, we expanded. We spent a lot more money on bringing in international headline entertainers. We had more staff, but we grew beyond our means. And so the unfortunate thing that we had to do right away was to lay off about half of our staff. And there were a lot of concerns in the community about this sort of what's the word? Momentum within Pride that bigger is better. I was elected as co-chair in September 2010, and it was very clear that myself and the new board members who were elected at that time were expected to make a big change within the organization. A little later on, our financial statements were delivered. In fact, we had incurred a deficit of over $430,000 in the 2010 festival. Fortunately, we had some reserves to apply towards that, so the net loss was about $100,000. In 2009 and 10, there had also been a controversy about the participation of one particular group called Queers Against Israeli Apartheid in the parade. In 2009, they marched as they had marched many years before, but there were some people, particularly in the Jewish community, who found their existence to be problematic. And so one of them made a documentary film about Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, which was a very misleading piece of propaganda, which had an altered soundtrack and overlaid text, essentially calling the group racist. And they delivered this videotape to all of the city council. And the Jewish community, certainly the very conservative elements of the Jewish community, also mounted a kind of a PR campaign where they encouraged their followers to phone all of their city councilors and say, we demand that Pride's funding be withdrawn if this group continued to be in the parade. Now, our position has always been that we don't actually bar anyone from the parade. If it's a community group from our community and they meet the other criteria, such as applying on time and etc., then they can participate in the parade. And certainly we also require everybody to sign on to the city's anti-discrimination policy, which is one of the policies that we follow at Pride Toronto. So in 2010, just before the parade, there was a lot of outcry against this group being in the parade. So we actually appointed an advisory panel led by Reverend Brent Hawks from the Metropolitan Community Church and 8 other respected leaders to conduct community consultations to make recommendations to Pride Toronto about its future direction. That report, which is written after extensive consultations, was delivered to us in February of this year, 2011. And it was a huge report. It had 130 recommendations about all the things that Pride should change, from its community relations to how it administers itself, how it does community outreach, financing, etc. So the first thing that we did in response was we accepted the recommendation formally, and we apologized to all of those members of our community who felt alienated by Pride. Right at that moment as well, our executive director resigned. So we kind of were rudderless for a while and had to begin a search for an interim executive director. And we wanted to also have a real hard look at our budget, and we got one of our major sponsors is TD Bank. We asked them to send us a financial expert to go through our budget with us and make sure it was really realistic on every level. We found our executive director in April. And by that time, planning for the festival was well underway, as it is every year, and people apply to participate in Pride in many different ways. Of course, the parade is a big one, but also we have a community fair, a marketplace, and several other events that need a lot of planning and coordination. Before the 2010 festival, George Mamalady led a contingent of councillors to pass a motion that he wanted the city manager to report back to council on whether or not the participation of this one group, Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, contravened the city's anti-discrimination policy. And so he did that in April, and he concluded that everything was fine, that there was no hate speech or none of the rules had been broken. And so we were in the news a lot around that time, because if we had lost our city funding, it would have, just the grant alone was 10% of our operating budget. But we also rely on the city to provide a lot of free services, such as policing, garbage cleanup, etc., the total value of which was about a quarter of our operating budget. So with this funding threat, a coalition of groups called Proud of Toronto was formed to defend our funding from the city, because it was felt that if Pride's funding were to go, then other smaller, more vulnerable groups would be next in line. And of course, that's what we're seeing happen now. That in the budgeting process that we're going through now, it's libraries, social service agencies, and a lot of other people, including the arts, that are being cut. But at that time, Pride was the sort of singled out organization. And so this group called Proud of Toronto held a big rally at City Hall, and we did a day of deputations to the Executive Council, and we were our funding was finally confirmed for 2011. When the festival itself came, another big media story broke, because Mayor Ford voluntarily said to the media that he wasn't planning to attend any of the celebrations at Pride, any of the events in a 10-day festival, that he couldn't find time in his schedule. So when we held our traditional flag-raising ceremony, which we do at City Hall the Monday of Pride Week, the mood was very, I would say it was very negative. Frances Nunziata made the declaration on behalf of the mayor, who was not present and was booed. And her reaction was to tell everybody, well, if you don't like what we're doing, why don't you go home? So not a very good message to send at the flag raising to read the Proclamation of Pride. Anyway, what always happens when those things occur is that the reaction within the community is actually brings us together. So people forgot about all the criticisms they had been making of Pride through the community consultation process 6 months before, and came together again in defense of Pride, because Pride is a very meaningful moment in the life of our city. The feeling that you were talking about the joy that you felt when you attended your Neil's wedding, is what people who attend Pride feel. I mean, when you are with people who are liberated and happy, that's such an infectious feeling, and one that can really change people's perspectives. We have over the 10 days of Pride, we have about 1.5 million visitors at various events, and that's a huge group of our city. Our theme this year was Dream Big, and it was in fact the biggest parade that we ever had. We had the greatest number of participants in all of our events, and as usual, one of the highlights of our events is our human rights program. And so this year we had a lawyer from the Philippines, Angie Umbach, come, and it's quite amazing to learn each year about what's happening in different countries, and the brave people who are trying to advocate for change in a far more hostile environment than we have here. The festival, also, we were very lucky. As an outdoor festival, we're very dependent on the weather, and we had fantastic weather this year. All of the favorite elements of Pride that people were expecting, we managed to save, even though we reduced the budget by $1 million. So the trans and dyke marches, the main parade, free entertainment. We saved a lot of money by just presenting local artists this year, and 94% of them were LGBTQ artists, including trans, youth, indigenous artists. We held our events in several languages, from French to Farsi, visual arts, and other forms of expression were celebrated as well. 3 sub-themes emerged at Pride this year. One was support for gay-straight alliances in the Catholic high schools, which of course continues to be a major issue, and fortunately Premier McGuinty just this week is introducing legislation that would basically force all of any high school to allow such a group to exist. Support for the trans rights bill. In the Senate, in the last session of Parliament, we had a bill that was talking about actually specifically including transgendered people in the Constitution and in the human rights legislation of the country. Unfortunately, it died when the House was prorogued. A new bill has just been introduced, this time in the House of Commons, asking for specific recognition and protection of trans people in our country. And so I would urge you to also lend your support to the passage of that bill. And the other theme of the parade this year was the 30th anniversary of the Toronto bathhouse raids. So in 1980, Toronto was pretty much at the point that New York was in 1969, where a lot of most gay activity was behind closed doors. And on one winter night, the police decided to raid all of the bathhouses, and I think there were 3 or 4 at the time, and arrested hundreds of gay men. And that was really the catalytic event in our city that really started an organized gay resistance it was that summer that the first Pride event happened in Toronto. It was a picnic on Hanlon's Point, and that was the beginning of our organization as well. So because of we were successful in getting our funding from the city, because we had fantastic attendance at the festival and lots of support, we actually managed to retire the entire deficit in 1 year. So we had made a commitment that we would pay back the $100,000 shortfall over 3 years. We've now completely eliminated that problem, and that's really important because Pride Toronto has been awarded the license to host World Pride in 2014. World Pride is an event that's only been held twice before, in Rome and Jerusalem. This year, in 2012, it will be celebrated in London, England. And in 2014, will come to Toronto and will be the first time it's held in North America. It's expected to be an event approximately 3 times the size of a normal Pride, where we welcome visitors from all over the world, from different Pride organizations, from different human rights organizations, and just the very coveted lesbian and gay tourist dollar to come to Toronto and celebrate really the kind of country that we are. To celebrate the progress that we've made here in Canada on human rights relating to lesbian and gay people, and also to educate everyone about how terrible it is in other parts of the world. Because if you are a lesbian or gay person, there are still many parts of the world where you do not go. You would not go to Uganda at this moment, or Nigeria. Nigeria has actually just introduced legislation to make even speaking about lesbian or gays a crime. In Moscow, they've had every single year they have a fledgling pride parade where people are routinely beaten and imprisoned. Moscow, Russia is supposed to be a developed country. Same thing happens in Poland. It's amazing. When I as in my role as co-chair of Pride Toronto, I get to travel. There's an organization called Interpride, which is the association of all the prides around the world. And every year we see videos and hear stories from people in places like Croatia, in South America, in Africa, where the conditions are still unimaginable. So part of our role is not only to educate people that this is going on, but also to help teach those activists in those countries the tools that we've used and raise money and give them the support that we can from here. So that's the purpose of World Pride. It's going to be a very exciting event. A bunch of us will be going to World Pride London this year to make a big splash for Canada. We've spoken to all of the Canadian Pride organizations across Canada, and they're going to be helping us by sending volunteers and standing beside us as we invite people to come to Toronto in 2014. So. We're in pretty good shape. We've gone through this. I think the worst moment in our history. I think that we could. Other cities have gone through this as well, and the result has been sometimes that the organization gets split into two. One being a kind of cultural festival, and the other a more political advocacy-oriented event. We've reaffirmed within Toronto that we want to keep those things together. That Pride is a celebration, but it's also a moment of advocating for rights and educating people about the rest of the world. Thank you very much.